The holy grail in education is for students to become effective, independent learners. Students who can self-regulate, monitor their own progress and adapt their processes are great at revising and preparing for exams. It may seem paradoxical then that allowing students to work independently is probably a bad way to achieve this goal. It is actually through clear instruction, explicit modelling and controlling the environmental conditions that actually have a larger impact on student achievement. I'm Ben Dickens, and today I would like to talk to you about a way in which we can make revision really count and support our students to become better, self-regulated, independent learners. Students often come in two camps when it comes to revision and independent learning. They either have no idea where to start or have no idea whether what they're doing is working. The challenge we have as teachers is to provide a scaffold and strategies to allow these students to revise effectively. The first challenge, I believe, is getting students started. Often students take a seat at the kitchen table during the slot that they have allocated on a roughly arbitrary timetable and open their revision guide. This is often the limit to their bespoke nature of their revision. Skimming back and forth, perhaps copying out something, and if we're lucky, they'll complete some exam questions. At the end of their hour, they can tick off that they've revised and move on. This isn't the fault of the student. If anything, it is a sign that we haven't quite done our bit right. To solve this problem, I suggest we centralise our revision schedule. Each week I set the specification points that I expect them to be revising. This way, when students rock up at the kitchen table, they know exactly which part of the course they're studying and there is no dead time flicking back and forth to find something that they want to read. The next challenge is what the students do with that revision session. My colleagues and I have developed a system for our students for them to follow that reduces the extrinsic cognitive load associated with revision by providing a rigid structure that needs to be followed in each session. This structure consists of 4 distinct activities. The first of these activities is labelled Assess. Students first assess what their strengths and areas in need for development are. They do this by using a prepared specification checklist, which they red, amber and green each specification point based on their understanding. This identifies the areas in which the students must concentrate their revision. The red specification points need addressing immediately, and the ambers should be revisited soon. The second activity is labelled Address. Following their first assessment of their need, the students must address their gaps in their knowledge. They can use videos, online resources, textbooks, their notes, or intervention from their teacher. Whichever process they use, it must be specific to their needs and should immediately be followed up with the third activity. This third activity, or the next stage, is labelled Create. Using the knowledge they have been acquiring in the previous section, the students need to create a new resource. Transforming the information they have interacted with into a new form will help them secure the links in their internal schema in order to help recall later on. This section is the one in which I allow the students the most freedom. They can design mind maps, cue cards, summary notes, a song, a dance, whatever, as long as it is original work and as long as it is bespoke to them. Finally, the students complete the last section labelled Reassess. A colleague of mine always tells his students, you wouldn't take your driving test without having practiced driving a car, and this resonates with us in preparing for exams. Students in this section must complete practice exam questions on their specific specification points. I suggest they complete 20 to 30 marks worth of questions and then self-assess. They must know how well they did in order to know what their next steps are. Now, I know that I started this by saying that I believed that we'd reduce the extrinsic cognitive load, and then I rattled off a long list of things I expect students to complete in every revision session. This may seem paradoxical, but actually what we've done is remove the uncertainty around revision. This system is uniform and eventually habitual for the students. No thought needs to go into how to revise. They can use their entire cognitive load on thinking about the content at hand and therefore make the revision really count. In order to guide students through this process, we produced a cover sheet that we set with every revision prep. The students fill in this sheet as they revise and then at the weekly deadline produce their work for me to inspect. I walk around the classroom checking the scores on their questions, asking about individuals' needs and areas for development, and checking the resources that they've built. Students can then return to these sheets when they next revisit the specification point in the future. At the bottom of this sheet, in the Reassess section, there is a table for recording their scores. Our expectation of students is that if they hit 80% or over on the questions that they selected, then they can set those specification points aside for now. Below 80% would suggest that they need to revisit these specification points soon, and below 50% needs immediate attention. However, because they have catalogued their process so far, they can select a different resource to address their need, create something new, and then answer some different exam questions to see if their new method worked better. All the resources, the specification checklists, the packs of exam questions are all produced in advance for the students and stored in one central location on our VLE. This means that students do not waste any time looking for a resource. They can simply select the ones that are appropriate for them during that session and get on with it. When I first introduced this to our science team, I realised that on paper this feels like a lot of work for the student. But under closer inspection, this is a short, effective process for students to engage with. Rough timescales that I give to my students go a bit like this. Assess, 5 minutes going through the appropriate spec sheet. Address, 10 minutes interacting with the source, filling the gaps identified in your knowledge. As this is part of a narrow set of spec points, this shouldn't take very long. Create, 10 to 20 minutes. This is the flexible task. Some students will take longer than others. It is important, but it's also important to highlight to students that a pretty mind map is not as useful as a completed, bespoke one that you can use to complete exam questions correctly. Reassess, 20 to 30 minutes. Time for the students to complete the exam questions and then mark them. The whole process should not last longer than an hour and potentially could have a 5-minute break in between creating your resource and completing the practice exam questions. Now, initially, students were resistant to not revising in the way that works for them. The truth is that students will often think that their way of revising is successful, when actually all it is easy or fun. The reality of the revision problem is that students are novices and do not necessarily know how they learn best. Luckily, we as teachers are the experts and should guide them through the process. In summary, set revision as homework. Make it explicit which specification points they are revising. Prepare specification checklists and packs of exam questions that cover small sections of the specification in advance. Provide students with these resources so that their revision can be as bespoke as possible. Give students a clear but rigid structure to follow in each revision session. This will reduce the time and energy wasted by each student deciding how to revise. Check regularly to check student progress and direct them to alternate methods if there is evidence that their chosen create or address strategies are not yielding the results. Thanks for joining today, and I hope you found something useful. Any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me on Twitter at Mr. B. Dickens, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of Chat Physics Live 2022. Goodbye.